At the time, there was no such thing as crazy rich Asians. Everyone was struggling to get out of basically post-communist China, and they started off as babysitters. So I did walk chef,
That's crazy.
6 days a week because at that point we shut down once a day.
And recruiting.
And recruiting. I would be literally taking client and candidate calls on my AirPods as I was stir frying food.
No way. I mean, talk about multitasking. I mean, that's the epitome of recruiters. A good recruiter could multitask, right?
I was making $200-something thousand, and my rent cost was about $200 a month.
Look at you.
Right? So that's how
Unbelievable.
I stacked six figures by the time I was 26. I had six figures in stocks.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the future, back to the podcast, where I bring you the best and the brightest in the world of business, marketing, personal growth, and recruiting to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Folks, my guest today in the podcast is Dandan. She leveraged her career as a top-billing headhunter and her 777 rule to build technical and executive search direct hire practices, which she parlayed into real estate investing. I love her story. It's awesome. And at 28, she achieved FIRE. Like fire the way we know it? Nah, financial independence, retirement early. She's got a great story. She's a big believer in what she calls the wealth trifecta, which consists of earning, saving, and investing, something we should all be doing. We have a lot to unpack. She's been a recruiting hero of mine. I'm excited to have her on here. Dandan, welcome to the podcast. Finally, we did it.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm so excited to be on your show.
This has been a long time coming. We've known each other for a while. We're OGs on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
We're part of the recruiters helping recruiters community. We got each other's back in this world. We've had a pleasure to meet in person. I admire, I respect her, and I'm excited to get into it and talk shop and life and all that kind of fun stuff.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. And I've been I've been doing this show for a while, and I've been workshopping this new approach where I really like to understand deeply where people come from. And I think that starts with your parents because it's an incredible story. I know the story. It says a lot about you from a work ethic perspective and how you put family first. Tell us a little bit about your family and their journey.
Yeah, in the mid 90s, like many other immigrants from China, they came here on a student visa. And at the time, there was no such thing as crazy rich Asians. Everyone was struggling to get out of basically post communist China. And they started off as babysitters. And I grew up living in a wealthy person's house, being surrounded by people that had many more things than I did.
Crazy.
Basically being the daughter of the help for the first 5 years of my conscious life. And just being in that situation, always being the poorest in my cohort has always, I guess that is where the chip on the shoulder began, right? Where there was both a good and bad thing. One is materially, I didn't have what they had, but emotionally, mentally, I had that grind. I knew that I could change my reality. So that's kind of the beginning of kind of our whole family's journey. And then obviously they got into the restaurant business that I was heavily invested in at a young age because that's what happens. You're free labor. And yeah, so it was a lot of hard work all the time. Yep. You go to work all the time. Again, that blessing of being able to learn work skills at a young age. And then that parlayed nicely into sales in the future.
I've had conversations with folks with similar backgrounds, and like you don't know anything else. You don't know anything else. You haven't been exposed to anything else but seeing that hard work and that grind. Do you remember like an early lesson from your parents? Maybe like normal folks wouldn't get that kind of lesson until they're like teens, but you got it when you're like 6 or 7 years old.
I remember sitting in like these chairs. When you go to Chinese takeout places, they have these like very hard metal chairs. That was our first restaurant. And I just remember being a little kid sleeping on two of those chairs as people were like renovating that first restaurant. And I just remember the loud noise and just sleeping through it. And countless times my cousin and I would just sit on the big rice, containers. They're like these sacks of giant commercial rice bags. And we would just sit on them and watch our parents working. All the time they were working. And so our daycare was the restaurant. And that's what we saw growing up was these boss women leading the charge, always saw our parents working, everybody working. And yeah, that was just some of my earliest memories about work.
And I love that, and you have that foundation. I've also heard of this kind of concept of immigrant guilt, right? Like where you want to make sure that you're paying back to your family, and you've gone through the journey. We've heard, correct me, keep me straight on the story. The restaurant closing down during, I mean, COVID was tough and everything. Like, talk to us about that because we're going to get to the business that you've built, but you're trying to do both. Now raising a family,
Yeah.
like you're trying to do all these things to keep your life moving
Oh,
forward,
yeah.
but this immigrant guilt. And my wife immigrated here from Russia. We've had a conversation about this. It's like proving them well and like always wanting to do right by them at the expense of your own journey. Did you
Yeah.
feel?
Oh, yeah, it happened to me twice. So right after college graduation, I could not pursue a job because my parents needed me to run the restaurant. At that time, they were doing other business ventures. There was a lot of personal turmoil, and everyone
Mm,
left. And it was just basically me, my dog, our family home that needed the mortgage to be paid, the restaurant that needed a general manager, and it was just me 7 days a week, 9:30, 10 to about 11, 12 at night,
crazy.
7 days a week for 8 months. That was like my life. There was no end in my sight. I had no idea when I was going to be freed of this burden. It was just like my family needed me and I had to be there. And only until after that period was over and my family decided to come back because things didn't work out. So my aunt and my dad came back.
Mm.
At that point, I was free to leave. And that's when I began my recruitment journey. So that happened once. And then after I became independent, set up my own recruitment firm, COVID hit. And because we have an elderly grandparent at home, we had to basically let go all of our employees because we couldn't risk anyone getting sick. And so I was called to come back home and be a walk chef. So I did walk chef,
That's crazy.
6 days a week because at that point we shut down once a day.
And recruiting.
And recruiting. I would be literally taking client and candidate calls on my AirPods as I was like stir frying food.
No way.
Literally.
Now,
And I would just
now
tell my
listen,
clients,
I've heard of occupational hazards. And they're loud too. Those are clanking away,
oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I had to tell them, I'm like, I'm so
And it's
sorry. I'm
hot.
like
those
cooking
those
right
walk
now.
fires are super hot, right?
Yep. It was like crazy. It was
Oh my
unbelievable because
God.
I still managed a team at the time. So my internal team, my family, the business, the
Oh
clients, the
my.
candidates, and the cooking. Like every night my arms would be
Do you-
sore from like cooking. It was crazy.
Don, do you have any videos of this?
I don't.
You
I
have
just
to have a video of you on a
honest-
call, like cooking and like just. I mean, talk about multitasking. I mean, that's the epitome of recruiters.
Yeah.
A good recruiter could multitask, right? We could be laser
Yeah.
focused when we need to, right? But we could also multitask like a beast, right? Like we have that game there. So let's go back to the "This Is Your Life" rewind button here. You mentioned the hustle. You mentioned the grind, and you like, was it a logical, like one way or another? I'm going into sales. What was that first sales job?
It was recruitment. So right after I was
So
looking
you
into
went right
sales
into
jobs.
recruitment. You were one of the
Yeah.
few, right?
I went right into it right after the restaurant. So I took 1 year off to do the restaurant, and then I was looking
Mhm.
for my future and stumbled into recruitment. So that was the sales job
We all
that
stumble.
sucked me in. Yeah, and then
So you started an
yeah.
agency. You started a
Yep.
search firm.
Mhm.
Do you remember like the process of them courting you? What they told
Yes.
you, reality versus expectation? Yeah,
It
I
was
think it's important because we're going to get into this.
I think they did a really good job telling me exactly what it was. But because I actually am interested in sales and I really wanted sales and I wanted commission,
Mhm.
it worked out really nicely for me. Like they didn't have to sell me on it because that's exactly what I wanted. And it actually ended up being better than my expectations because I asked my boss at the time, I said, what is the average income that first year recruiter makes? And they're like, you're
Mhm.
probably good at 65. I was like, I can live off of 65, right? Even
Mhm.
though the base
But I
salary is
could do better.
35. Yeah, I could like live off of
Right.
65. So at the worst case scenario, I did not have the confidence to say I would be great, but I had the confidence to say at the very least, I will be average. I had that confidence, right? Because I have no idea how I'm going to do in this job. I just know that at
No, because you've never
worst-
done it before.
Never done it before. So just assumption, the worst case scenario, I will be average and I will take home at worst 60 to 65, which I can scrimp and save and
Right.
live off of, right? I can live
Yeah.
off of that. And so that was the math I
I
did.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And my first year I did 87. So it was just like,
There you go.
okay, I didn't have to worry too much, but it did end up being better than what I expected. I could not believe how good the job was once I got into it.
And right, and so I worked. Everyone knows my story. I worked 15 years on a 9 to 5 corporate marketing. I worked, in advertising. But then it wasn't until I went into recruiting that I knew it was something I was meant to be. Because to be successful at sales, you have to have that tenacity to be able to kill what you eat. You have to. And if you don't have that in you, it's not meant for you.
Mhm.
Maybe go back to corporate recruiting, right? Maybe you
Mhm.
love the people angle of it, but if you don't
Mhm.
like the hunting element and the thrill of the hunt and what you get from not everyone has that in them, right?
Right. Right. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, people don't have that. So were you taught, like, did you have a good mentor? Were you taught the art and science of it? Were you just kind of thrown in there and said, get it? And what were you recruiting for in the beginning?
So I recruited for pharmaceutical industry and
Mm,
specifically regulatory medical writing for the first 3 years of my career on a full desk. So we had no clients, we had no
hmm
candidates. Our ATS was completely bare because it was a British firm that was coming to the US,
hmm
and I was the first of 5 people, 2 of whom were British and the other 2 failed relatively quickly. So I was like the first one that actually sort of worked out, and I started landing clients and just they're given, all of us are given sort of basic training because it is a very successful firm
hmm
in the UK. And when they were coming to the US, they had
Right.
these British trainers that would be flown out to teach us. So we had like basic training. Then we had
And
like
it's different. UK, pause for a second. UK and US are very different.
yeah,
Much more
totally
aggressive over
different,
there,
much
which
more
is helpful.
aggressive, much more helpful. I think the training is basic. It's pretty basic though. Like a lot of it is just like, here's how you write an introductory statement. IRL, do we actually use
hmm
introductory statements? No. We go into the MPC, but they don't really teach you like the play by play. They give you the concept. So they're like, hey, we want you to sell most placeable candidates. You take that concept and you run with it. They say, hey, we want you to create a marketing document about this most placeable candidate. You have to figure it out. There's no real, like, I'm going to show you how to do it. It's more just like, you got to kind of do it, however you do it. So that's the part of creativity that I really enjoyed, was taking the concepts and running away with those training concepts and getting them down on a foundational level, but then making them my own and improving upon the basic concepts that I was provided. So that was really helpful, getting basic training, but then being able to learn on the job and tailor it to my own style and also what I thought was commercially applicable at the time.
Right. But you also had to learn the industry. Like, what did you know about the pharmaceutical industry? You had to go in and learn the
Yeah.
industry.
Mhm.
How'd you do that? Because I know a lot of
Yep.
folks that go in and they're like, shit, like I don't know about this. The smart ones go in, they reverse engineer the interview process.
For me, it was really that I took no interest in the industry, and I still
Hmm.
don't. And I didn't. I did not find the industry interesting. And I don't think it's that important. If you were to look at, you know how like when you play a game like Super Mario Kart, you get to choose
Right.
like different cars, and certain
Doesn't
cars you have a
matter.
speed, you have,
Yeah.
weight, you have
Different
whatever.
tires,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
For me, it's like technical knowledge, I'm probably at a 2 out of 10. And I'd say that confidently because it's not really relevant. I think what's really relevant is how do you get people to like you and trust you? And you're never going to out regulatory write a regulatory writer. There's You only have to know certain keywords that like, have you done this? Basically, when you talk to clients, you would just ask them, what's important to you? What are the top 3 things
hmm
that you really look for in a candidate? They give you
Assess
the
those
answer.
skills best you can. Yep.
Yeah, that's the answer. They're like, we want a medical writer that has done an
Great.
ISE. Go
And
onto
then let
Google.
them do the deep evaluation.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm like, what the hell is an ISS or ISE? In case someone asks me what it is, integrated summary, like
You need to know.
efficiency report. I can't remember now, but so now I would just go and ask candidates, cool, what's your experience with ISS ISE? And now they're like, the lingo. So once you know the lingo, you're
hmm
cool. Like, I don't actually know what goes into it. I don't really know what it is. I have a
No,
general
you're not a writer.
concept. I don't know. Like, I take zero interest in science. Zero. And the craziest thing, Adam, was clients would tell me, hey, we're creating this new drug. It's blah, 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 boobafam. I wouldn't even
Yeah.
remember the
Booba
name.
fam.
I wouldn't even
Doesn't
remember
matter.
the name. I'm just like, it's irrelevant. Like, I don't need to know this stuff. You're the people that need to know this stuff. If I get a medical writer from a top pharmaceutical company, they're going to know exactly what's going on. I do not have to tell them, oh, XYZ company is trying to do
No, they
XYZ
know.
thing. They know already. So I've never had to go into those technical details. What I've had to do is fight for their attention, fight for their loyalty, fight for
And
their
trust.
respect. Yeah.
hmm
So that's what I've had to spend 85% of my energy on.
That is fascinating. When did it finally feel like it clicked that you were like destined for this and it was successful? Like that first moment of success. Like, all right, I got this. This is gonna be
I would
This is going to be the
say
path.
I kind of knew pretty much day 1, I was like, "This is great." Like, day 1, I was like, "This is really
Hmm,
great." Like, I already knew this is great. But I think when I really
amazing.
understood that this is perfect for me, probably around the 6-month mark. At that point, like, I had already done I don't even know how many clients I brought in at that point. I had already gone on so many client meetings, and it was just, like, only one of the
Mm.
days a boss came with me to go to a client meeting, and after that, they just left me alone and let me just drive to Jersey and meet all these clients. And so at that point, I already felt confident enough, even 6 months in, I was like, "I can go to these meetings. I can go to all of these meetings and be totally self-sufficient and be very legitimate." Already 6 months in, I had done, I think it was like 3 or 4 deals, and I had more in the pipeline. I was like, "I got this. This really isn't that hard." And I already got a cadence that this is doable. So yeah, about
Well,
6 months in.
and I felt the similar way, but then I also hit the honeymoon phase, and the honeymoon phase ended, and I hit my first rut. Did you have that like first kind of like dip? And because I know for me that was a gut check.
Yeah. For me, I have to say, I had never had any issues until I became a manager 3 years later, and I had to adjust to becoming a manager. That's a totally different conversation. The actual, like, 3 years I did regulatory writing, I did 330 my first year, 5 something my second,
Hmm,
7 something my
there you
third,
go.
did 1.5 in 3 years, global top biller every single year. It really clicked. Like, I was really good at this thing and I really monopolized my market. Every year, I monopolized it even more. So I really didn't have any hiccups. I never really had a bad month. But because I worked at a large recruitment firm, they kind of make it hard for you to have a bad month because everyone is so beholden to their KPIs. So you never have a month where you're like, "Oh, I let
Don't
my
give you the
foot
room
off the
to dip.
gas." Yeah, you can't dip because the science behind the machine, it's so clear. It's like you do this amount of activity, you're going to get this type of return, and when you add it all up, it compounds. So it can only go up exponentially.
Let's talk about that, right? Like, and you learn that quickly. It's a numbers volume machine game. If you're doing things the right way, but you have to feed. Yes, there's different niches when it comes to recruiting, and some people are
Right.
like really an inch wide and a mile deep. Some people are more generalists. Like for me, I cover more marketing, but there's also
Right.
niches within marketing.
Right.
But if you have the flow and if you keep things moving, the
Yes.
mistake is when you do take your foot off the gas. I mean, I learned that the hard way in my first year
Yep.
was August, and I had all these deals coming in. I thought life was good, and I was like, "Oh," I
Yep.
made the generalization that everyone's taking the month off. No, 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 and
Right.
it made for a tough
Right.
September and
Yep.
October, and it wasn't until November that year that
Yes.
things got kind of going back in. When did you kind of, you had these 3 years? Was it at that point you realized that you had this financial independence or fire, as you call it?
Yeah, I mean, I started buying real estate pretty much after that 3rd year. I had saved up over 6 figures from those 3 years, and that is how I got the down payment to put into my first condo. And then after that, I had another decent year, and that is when I bought my second condo. And once that condo closed in November, I was like, I might as well wait until, the Vegas trip and wait till, the
Mm,
big companies, they always do these trips. I'm going to wait until end of January where I still had a decent, you know, I think it was like $30,000 commission check. So I was like, I'm going to wait till end of January and I'm going to coast. And that I think is a perfect time for direct hire people to quit because that's when all your bonuses are paid out. That's when all your starters have started and your whole year is
yep.
beginning again, right? Because no one's doing deals in December. Like I mean, sometimes it happens, but very rarely. So it's not like I'm leaving a
Right.
lot of
Depends on
money
the
on the
start date.
table.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. So like I had already timed it that by the end of January, I was able to quit and just leave without any sort of regret or anything holding me back.
Well, let's pause on that for a second here because one, and my first question is, did you always kind of have like this real estate mindset? How'd you learn about that? Were you kind of self-taught? Were there
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of talking heads out there in this space, right?
Yep.
Like who did you follow? Like what was the game plan there? How'd you even
Yep.
understand the structuring and taxes and LLCs and all that kind of stuff?
Yep. Well, my mom started doing real estate investing like many immigrants do, especially in that generation when homes were very cheap.
Mm,
She started doing real estate investing at about high school age. That's when she would
wow.
drag me outside of working at the restaurant. She would grab me to go to all her like gross homes. I mean, these were nasty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my mom was a slumlord at one point, and literally I was just shoveling junk and dirt and pests and nasty stuff, weed
Shit.
whacking, painting
Gross.
walls, spackling, like in these nasty apartments. They're not nice. And I was just like, ooh, there's something, I never minded it. I thought it was something fun about spackling and compound. And like, this was fun. I was like, I didn't get any money. Again, my mom would just buy me a sub. She'd be like, thanks for helping me. Here's a sub. And I'd look forward to that sub. And it was just like, it was just doable. That's what she showed me. It's like doable. It's not the world's most complicated thing. It's possible, right? And so when I got into recruiting, I was like, I got to find a way, because Rich Dad Poor Dad, I read that in like when I was 19.
Mm-hmm.
And then I reread it in my mid-20s. And I started just spending all my weekends in the library. At that point, I was sick of the big agency culture. I was like done with socializing. On the weekends, I was like, I'm going to educate myself on real estate. So I went to the library. This is before social media. This is before you have all these talking heads that are nonstop 24/7 selling you something. This is just go to the library, go and read books, read the IRS tax code, do your research.
Immerse yourself, understand it.
Understand the beast. Yeah, but because we do recruiting, I knew that I could handle tenants. Just because, like, if I can handle adults, I can handle like customer service,
right?
Right? It's just customer service. So I'm like, I know
it's managing expectations, right? It's all
managing. Yep. It's like process. It's understanding people. And I was so young, and I was like, I can still deal with this. And meanwhile, in New York City, my rent was about $200 a month. Why? I had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that I purchased the lease from my previous sub-landlord. This is very common in the Chinese community, where you have a sub-landlord. You have a kid or an adult who is renting from the landowner, from the landlord, who is then, they now have the right to lease this property, and then they're sub-renting it to families and individuals. So I took over the lease. I became that sub-landlord. I had, Adam, I'm not joking when I tell you, I probably had like over 30 roommates in my life, because I did that for 10 years. For 10 years,
right, but
I
brought your rent down, right?
It brought my
rent
down
it, and then
I was making $200
$200 in New York City.
I was making $200,000, and my rent cost was about $200 a month.
Look at you.
Right. So that's how I stacked 6 figures by the time I was 26. I had 6 figures in stocks.
And living in New York City, right?
Living in New York City. Living and
the
working
most
in New York City.
expensive place to live, going out for dinner, trying to be normal and socialize, and at least live a little bit of a life in groceries and just living. And even if you park all that socialization shit, it still costs a ton.
It still costs. So the fact that like that rent hacking is how I had the confidence. I was like evaluating tenants on whether it was Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. At that time, Facebook Marketplace was on the come up, right? It replaced Craigslist. So that's how I got used to like tenant screening, at least for my direct roommates. And I got really good at it. I never had anyone not pay me.
Because you applied your recruiter mentality.
Recruiting mentality, customer service, friendships. Like I tried to look for people that I liked that were around my age. Because obviously I'm a 26-year-old girl. I'm not going to rent to some 70-year-old man. Like that's not going to happen. Like you get that chance to be selective as a direct roommate, right? Whereas you can't do that as a landlord. You cannot discriminate as an actual landlord. You can as a roommate. Yeah. So there's a lot of rules around that.
You're also figuring out like assessing financial credibility too, because you don't want to chase rent. You don't want to deal with any of that stuff. Same thing with chasing bad clients. You don't want to chase it. It's the worst.
Yeah, you have to kind of feel out.
Collecting is the worst part of our job.
Yep. I've had girls. I've had
daddy
guys.
paying for you? Great.
I would love that. No, all of my tenants, roommates were like self-sufficient, because that's why they're living in a room, right? They had to rent directly a room, not necessarily had the money to get an apartment. Yeah. So that's what gave me confidence that like, how hard can it be to be a landlord? I'm already doing it. The only difference is I don't own it yet. Right.
There's such a theme in your story. There's such a theme of just consistent grind and tenacity, and I love it. And I think that's why we're connected here. So when was the decision to get back into the recruiting game and do your own thing?
Well, the real estate game took a sharp turn. So 2016 January, I quit recruiting. No game plan. Was just going to go heavy into real estate. Found a ski house in Mount Snow. literally plowed the last 40,000 to my name into that property. I was living on basically nothing except rental income at that point. And the issue with
Wow.
rental income, because I invested in areas like Baltimore, is that evictions started happening. And what happened was I started getting into this cycle of debt using my personal line of credit, which existed at the time. Now it's very hard to get personal line of credit. At that time, I still had my personal line of credit, $20,000 from like college. Somebody signed me up for it at Citibank. And so I was mad at them at the time when they signed me up for the personal line of credit. I'm like, why'd you do that? Turns out it was a blessing. I had this stack of checks and I was just writing one check to pay off old money, new money to pay off old money. And the evictions started stacking. They started stacking up and I could no longer, I was like down to, I was already negative $17,000. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. At that point, a friend was like, have you considered setting up a rec-to-rec firm because they exist? I was like, what's rec-to-rec? And she's like, recruitment firms that service recruitment companies. I was like, genius. Immediately, I was like, genius. Genius business idea, because the most candidate-driven market would be agency recruiters. The most candidate-driven market would be that. And I love candidate-driven markets because that's my specialty. It's like super hyper niche direct hire, super candidate-driven, passive candidate desks. That's my perfect niche. And because I had zero interest in STEM, remember, I had zero interest in scientific recruiting. So when I left my old firm, I had zero intention of setting up a pharmaceutical recruitment firm, despite how big my deals were. Like the last few deals I did were all at the 6-figure range. And the reason why I stopped doing it, because I simply did not feel interested in pharmaceutical recruitment. And also because I no longer had money as my sole driver. That was a huge change. So when I saw this rec-to-rec opportunity, I was like, it was just like the amount of work, the amount of travel, the amount of face-to-face, I'm happy to do that, but my drive was no longer money.
This is much less.
Yeah, my drive was more interest and future growth. That's why I like rec-to-rec, because that's my interest.
Hey everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love, and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
So let's pause for a second here. Let's do a little show and tell for anyone out here who's listening who doesn't understand what rec-to-rec is and what it isn't. So let's be clear here. You are recruiting agency recruiters for search firms. You are not recruiting for corporate in-house recruiters. We are a different breed. Sometimes we cross-contaminate. Sometimes we go to one side, then we go back to the other. But true agency recruiters like you and I, we're a different breed. There's different blood going through our veins. There's different DNA. We're the hunters. And there's different types of recruiting. Was there a learning curve for you there? Like, how'd you have to, like
Absolutely.
pitching business to an agency to be a recruiter seems like so cannibalistic. Like, why can't they do it themselves?
Well, actually,
why can't they do it themselves?
Because
they're their asses. They're just not good. Blinders on. Did they not see the market? Like what?
It's just like our clients, right? Like they do technology or they do blah or they do blah. They do the thing. They do whatever it is. So a pharmaceutical company is going to create drugs. They're not a specialist recruitment firm that specializes in headhunting for that particular type of staff, right? So then they outsource to these specialists. Same with recruitment firms. What is a recruitment firm's function? Their function is to recruit for their clients in specific niches. So their niche isn't recruiting for recruitment firms. And they have internal recruiters, but the internal recruiters, like all internal recruiters, are limited by what they can do and who they are and their capabilities, right? Just because
the market they know.
And the market, because you're only representing one business. So an internal recruiter for a big recruitment firm can only represent one company. And the same candidate fears exist in the type of markets that we service ourselves, right? Like candidates are scared of interacting with companies directly because they don't know if the word is going to get out. And that's why they need a headhunter. Highly tight candidate market.
We're the agent, right?
They really need an agent
with intermediary.
to protect intermediary. And that learning curve that you mentioned, Absolutely, there's a learning curve because not all agencies are good agencies to use as a client. And not all agencies should be a client. Some agencies should be a poaching site. Some agencies, the clients are crazy. So it took a while for me to learn, okay, this is how a rec direct works. This is how to structure a rec direct business. And I, in the beginning, hired a bunch of people. It was more of a mass market approach.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're completely opposite. We're very much a niche boutique focus. No more mass market. We're only servicing a very small, even smaller niche than just agency recruitment in general. Now it's even smaller. We're not servicing the mid-size, the big agencies that are just looking to onboard loads of people. Now it's like,
Right.
no,
You're
we're
not,
only
no.
helping boutiques. Yeah. So it
You're
changed
niching
again.
down, and it's also a higher price tag and a higher value. But that
Yep.
comes down to knowing your value. You're paying for a higher quality deliverable, a higher quality candidate, a higher quality level of service. And once you know
Yep.
your value, I mean, that's all. It's all in here, folks, and we'll get to that I'll get to that in a second. But I want to go back for a minute there because I think it's important for any other recruiters out there. Like, what are some red flags aside from the obvious? But what are some of those red flags with agencies you don't want to work with, or if you're a recruiter, what you
Mhm.
work with? We all know, like, shitty compensation, not
Yep.
paying you right on time,
Yep.
bad reputation, like what are some of these things?
Those are pretty much it. It's just like the bosses aren't very nice. They're kind of two-faced. There's a lot of people in this business that can turn it on and off. They're not really genuine. So those people are hard to work for because they have favoritism in the office. They are money grubbing
Mhm.
and they're not looking out for their staff. So on the good days, they're generous. In the bad days, they'll steal from you. That's not a safe place for someone to bet their career and business in. So a lot of people, once they've seen that, once they've gotten burned, they're like, this is not the place I want to be at. Similar to my experience. At a certain point, you kind of realize I'm not feeling super good here. Right. So every agency recruiter gets that point where they're at an agency where they're like, I'm not feeling super good, but I
It's
don't know
not
where
here.
else to go. And I'm scared to go to the wrong one. That's where we come in. We're like, okay, we've taste tested the market. We know who's good and who's bad because these are all the people we talk to. We know all the goss. We know all the tea. We know exactly what's happening because these are the people we talk to every single day. Right. So I think that's the value that we bring to our candidate market. And certainly for clients, we can help clients. And there are many, many nice people who are clients that get bamboozled and lied
There's
to
some
by
good
candidates.
yeah, exactly.
That also
There's
happens.
some good recruiters, right? There's some shitty recruiters out there,
There's some
right?
shitty recruiters that
Listen,
lie. Yep. That they say that they have certain motivations and they don't. And their goal is, I want to get myself a really nice comp package and I'm going to wait until I get a perfect internal recruiting job. And I'm going to just waste this boss's time for the next 6 months. And it's no shirt off my back. I still get my big fat guarantee. And then I get the perfect TA job and I'm gone. We don't want our clients to be screwed either. That's not fair
no,
financially. Right. So yeah. So
yeah.
there's
I mean, you can't always
mistakes on both
predict that,
parts.
but there are indicators.
Yes,
So
there's
what makes a good
indicators.
recruiter? What makes a good recruiter in your opinion? What are those fundamentals, those foundations that make for a good recruiter?
I think all good recruiters, and I talk about this a lot in my book, agencyrecruitment.com. Agency Recruitment 101. The last chapter, chapter 10, is all about what are the top traits, right? And I think the first one is there has to be a motivation for money. And I will argue this till the cows come home. The minute your
You
motivation
have
for
to.
money,
We are in
you
a
have
sales
to.
job, right? We're in a
Yeah.
sales job. The motivation's money.
The
You have to be
motivation
driven.
has to be driven by money. Like goals have to be linked to financial success. I have not met a single top performer who doesn't talk about money. So sometimes when I talk to agency recruiters and they don't talk about money, that freaks me out a little bit. I'm like, why would you not talk about money? Right? Like one of the first, if I'm a recruiter and
I'm
someone's
in it for the
interviewing me,
people. I'm in it
Yeah.
for the people.
I just want to help people. Like, right. That is a classic thing.
Come on, it's
Thankfully,
bullshit.
people have stopped saying that to me because my content, I guess, is
They
strong enough.
know.
Yeah. But in the beginning,
Yeah.
people used to say that to me all the time. And I used to waste a lot of my time trying to convince people. But you can't manufacture that. You either have it or you
No.
don't. So I think part of it is financial drive. Another part of it is just like skills. Just like, are they asking the right questions? A lot of times people are asking closed-ended questions, and I could just tell that they're not top of their game yet. They're not asking the best questions. And that one's kind of hard to say because some of them sound good, their tone is good, their cadence is good, but what they're saying is they're just not very smart. And I can kind of tell that. But with the best ones, we have a really good conversation. They get a lot of information out of me. It's very much
Mhm.
flows. It's like tennis, and you're just constantly volleying back and
It's
forth.
a great analogy.
It's a really good feeling. Some people it's just like
You know it, right?
it's like, yeah, it's a little bit
Right, you
zigzag.
know it when you get on a call with a
Yeah.
candidate, right?
Yeah.
You know it. But I mean, listen, I also give a little bit of grace, not with agency recruiters, but with candidates, because agency recruiters,
Right.
you have to be extroverted.
Ex-
We are, and I explain this is what I explain to
right.
my wife and my friends. I go on sometimes 10 or 12 blind dates a day.
Yeah.
And each one of
Yeah.
those calls, screening calls, is a blind date. And I want to
Yep.
see some personality. I want some engagement here. But at the same
Yep.
time, in this world that we live in, you have to be mindful about like
Right.
neurodiversity, and not
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
extroverted based on the role,
Right.
right? You don't always have to be an
Right.
extrovert, but is that person curious? Are they asking the right questions? For me, the biggest
Right.
flag of any candidate at the end of the call, if they don't have any questions, if you don't have a single question, something's wrong. There's no way in 28 minutes that I just answered everything for you on an initial screening call. There's no way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think again for
You have to
agency
have
recruiters,
curiosity.
yeah, the barometer is much higher, like in terms of what I expect from
Mhm.
communication skills. When I was recruiting for pharmaceutical medical writers,
Of course.
I don't totally different bunch of tech,
No.
profile. But for agency recruiters, I expect you to be good at writing. So one of the candidates recently that I rejected sounded amazing on the phone. I mean, the most charming person you will ever meet, one of the silver tongued people.
Mm.
Age was right, everything was right, like just perfect. But his emails were terrible. His resume writing
Hmm.
skills were terrible. And I just was like, something is just not adding up. Like I'm spoon feeding you the to-do tasks. And this is worse than like a middle schooler. Like, and you just know in today's world,
That's not the way it works.
yeah, if you can't write a decent business email, how are you supposed to do your NPC
You-
specs? Like, how do you write your specs if you are a terrible writer?
It comes down to communication. It comes down to communication and
Communication
managing
skills.
expectations on all sides.
Yep. It's the
It
verbal
has
skills,
to
the
be,
written
and I
skills.
teach it all the time.
Yep. Verbal skills and
It
written
comes
skills.
down to like,
Yep.
but
But I do want to highlight.
What are your thoughts?
I do want to highlight that one thing
Please.
you mentioned about extroversion, introversion. I don't really look for that because I have met and I have seen many successful agency recruiters that are more introverted.
Yes.
So I actually wrote about that in the book where I'm like, I don't look for someone who's blabber. Blabbers don't necessarily do well because they're good in the short term. They're not good. They don't have the
They're
staying
not
power.
listening.
Yeah, they don't have like sustainability. They're kaputs after a couple hours, right? Because you can maintain the level of heightened excitement for a certain amount of time, and then you just like, whatever, I'm not going to work for the rest of the day, right? So I'm looking for
That's fair.
resilience. Yeah, so I want resilience. I want to see that you have some sort of backstory. So there's like some sort of, like you've done things, that you've stuck with things. Tenure is really big for me when I'm looking at a profile. Like if you've been at one agency every year, hell no. That's a hell to the no. Especially if you're on your fourth agency. If you're on your fourth
Something's
or
wrong.
third,
Something's wrong.
yeah. If you're on your third or fourth agency, I'm gonna really look at this profile.
It's either poor decision making or poor performance, right? Either you're not doing
Yeah.
a good job vetting yourself as a recruiter of that next agency,
Yep.
or something's not right from a performance perspective.
Right.
I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I want to get your take on a couple of things here.
Yep.
How are you utilizing the tech, right? Like AI is the biggest buzzword in our industry
Yep.
right now. And I always say in our world, use it as a tool and not a crutch. Find it for ways to be more efficient, to be more effective,
Mhm.
but don't let it take away from the actual art and science of recruiting that we need,
Mhm.
right? Let it help those things.
Yep.
But how are you using it? What's your take on AI in our world?
I really like AI. I've used ChatGPT on certain things. Recently, I made a placement where it was a very tricky resignation process. And at one point, I didn't know the perfect words to use in the email. In the email write-up of the resignation letter to help my candidate. So I popped it into ChatGPT and I explained the situation. And ChatGPT gave me two versions, a long version and a short version of that particular paragraph that I was struggling with putting into very good professional
Synthesize
terms.
it.
Yeah. The rest of the email was great because the candidate and I just kind of designed it together. But that one piece I found to be very difficult. And ChatGPT did a very good job of giving the candidate two options and it was the most beautiful exit letter, whatever have you, that
Love that.
I loved it. I was like, this is beautiful. This is just like best practice. So I think AI is wonderful when you pair it with the human brain, because if I asked AI just to write an email of itself, it would be pretty bad. It would be overall bad. Some parts might be good,
No, it's
but other parts
robotic.
would be bad.
Of course.
Yeah, it's very noticeable. It's very inhuman. It's you don't feel anything from it. And so that's why I don't recommend people to write a most placeable candidate spec using ChatGPT, because ChatGPT doesn't know what hiring managers think, doesn't know how their brain works and sort of how the logical A to Z layout should look like. Only very experienced salespeople kind of know how to design it so that it sells to the hiring manager. So
For
I do think that
comprehension.
for human, so like the human brain is still designed in a way that okay, this is how they're going to react. But if you're not very good with grammar, you're not really good with words, ChatGPT can really help you improve your communication skills, right? So I think it's wonderful.
But you hit on something too. Are you seeing candidates, especially let's talk our specific, overutilizing some of these AI tools for their resumes, right? I see a lot of candidates, and it's night as day because a lot of them just forget to take away some of the key tell indicators. They're utilizing these tools out there that pull in the job description, pull in keywords, pull in parts of it to make it sound like those jobs. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, I could look at your LinkedIn. I see the company and the role that you did. You didn't do that.
Right.
Are you seeing candidates get in trouble that way?
I just see them doing that regardless of AI. Regardless of AI or not, candidates have always done that. They have always borrowed from JDs.
They've been doing that forever.
Very
People relying on their resumes.
They've been doing it forever. Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. And that again is where the headhunter comes in. Part of the suite of services that we offer, and I've always offered since day one, even back when I did pharmaceutical recruitment, it's like you're going to get a free resume rewrite because I want to control the narrative. As a headhunter, I know,
of course,
how the client's going to think. Yeah, like I know how they're going to think down to how they're going to read your resume. And I want to control everything there is about your submittal to increase my odds of success in getting you through the process, right? Because the hardest thing I think for headhunters is like, what can I do to ensure that I'm at 100% hit rate? Because that's fully in your control. I want to be at 100% hit rate. Why 100%? Because I don't want to waste my time submitting someone that's not going to be selected. That should never happen. If I'm taking the time to submit someone, it better be 100% hit rate. Because why else am I doing this? What a waste of my time if my odds are anything less than 100%. I want something out of this submittal, and it's going to be an interview request, right? So I have to manipulate the resume. And I've always done this since 2011. So still, I'm taking their resumes today and I'm rewriting the whole thing. This is part of our service. And it's not because we're generous. It's not because we're just super, super love to write resumes for free.
No, there's an intention behind it because you want to control your success rate.
Controlling the narrative.
As best you can outside of the X factors that you can't control. Right? There's X factors. We all know the X factors in recruiting.
Yep. I'm making sure that my client's going to say yes.
Let's talk about the book here. Yes, as best as possible, right? Like give them zero reasons to say no, aside from the X factor. Let's talk about the book. What was the impetus behind this book?
Wow. Honestly, I just had so much to share about these last 6 years of doing rec to rec. So because I have been a rec to rec recruiter since 2017, 2018, I now have 6 years of knowledge about how recruitment firms are run, how many different types of recruitment firms there are, my own personal experience of working at a recruitment firm. And I thought, how great would it be if someone could just read that and just have that access that I did not have when I was 23 years old, interviewing at my first recruiting firm. And that was the only recruiting firm I ever interviewed at because I didn't know that other recruitment firms even existed. That is how dumb and naive I was at 22, 23, right? Like no idea that there are actually millions of recruiting firms out there. I thought there was just the one.
Hyper specialized.
So stupid, right? Like I would go to conferences. Yeah, I would go to a conference and I would meet people from other recruiting firms. I would be shocked. I'm like, there are other recruiting firms? Like I literally could not believe it.
What do you do?
I was like, wait, you also do recruiting? They're like, yes, we're like way bigger than yours. And I'm like, what? I didn't even know that other people were doing recruiting. I thought we were the only one. Because in my narrow world, I'm the only recruiter that matters in my market. I was the one doing the majority of the deals. So I never come against anybody else. Nobody ever really competed with me. I had a monopoly on my market. So I did not know that other firms were also trying to tap into these markets. And so now, knowing all of this, I was like, I need to put it into a book. In the beginning, the book was way longer. And now I
Really?
decided, okay, I'm going to separate it into multiple parts, because the book that I wrote initially was like, what is agency recruiting? How do you get an agency recruiting job? What are the things you need to do on the interview to get an agency recruiting job? That ended up becoming, that's 3 books. So the first book that I ended up writing is what is agency recruiting? Before we even talk
Multi-volumes
about,
here.
yeah, like before we even talk about how do
Yeah.
you get an agency recruiting job,
The chapter.
let's first talk about what it is. You know, what are the different varieties of recruitment there are?
Yes.
Contract recruitment versus direct hire versus British firm versus American firm versus draw versus base plus commission versus quarterly versus
It's a lot.
all of these like terms that I simply did not know until I started Direct Track. And then I was like, I know it all. I know how every single firm does their income. I know how they do all their commission spreads, how they do their commissions, why they design commission schedules a certain way and why they do it that way and why certain firms would not do it that way.
Yep.
What are the
It's
limitations?
important to know everything about that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I was like, this is
understanding
just too good.
contracts, understanding what goes into it.
Yep.
When-
Yep. All of
This
the
is too good here.
information.
So
Yeah.
who's this book for?
It's for people that are,
Who should pick this book up? Who should be reading this?
it's for people that are considering going into agency recruiting. So someone who's like, oh, my friend said I should be a recruiter. What is recruiting? Perfect book for you to start.
Yeah.
Another good book is people who've got
Here
into
you
recruiting.
go. Read this.
Yeah, just read it. Just read it. Like now you know everything about it, right? The second thing is like people who got hit up by a recruitment firm and was like, oh, I want to go interview for this recruiting firm. I want to sound more knowledgeable. I don't know what it is yet. I may not even want it, but I just want to go on the interview and not look like a total idiot. Perfect. This is
Yeah.
going to teach you all the jargon that you need to know, all the differences between HR and TA versus agency side.
Yeah.
I talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
It's like, this is not an HR job, right? Explaining that in further detail. And then also it's good for people who are already at their first agency. Someone who is working at one agency who is like, I wonder what things are like outside of my 4 walls. That's a perfect book for you to read because, again, it goes over the whole industry. If you work in a British firm, now the book is going to teach you what it's like to work in an American firm. What are the differences? If you work at a large chop shop agency, what's the difference between that and a boutique? How are the comp structures different? So that's
Of
where
course.
it's a little bit intermediate because it's like now we're
There's a
talking
lot. There's
comp.
nuances.
Yeah, there's a lot of like intermediate, advanced subject matter in here. Not just, oh, what is TA? What is agency? It's a lot more than that. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about commissions
No.
plans.
This is the
Yes,
insight.
it's a little deeper. Yeah.
So, last point on the book here. What did you learn about yourself through the process of writing this?
That and this is something I know about myself as a humongous weakness. I'm overly positive on how fast I'm going to do something. And I have to be very patient and I have to be okay with things taking a lot longer than I expected. But also my experience writing the book, I paid somebody $15,000 in order to be enrolled in a mentorship program. So every month I would talk with my coach and
right.
paid. Yeah, because you paid that for $15,000, you feel this pressure that you have to get to the finish line and you have to put out the book because you've now spent the money. And you have to get it to the editor so that you can move forward to the formatting process. And that's what the company, I have to say, did a terrible job when it comes to the formatting, when it comes to cover design. A lot of this I DIY'd it because I was so disappointed. I had to learn new technology to edit Adobe Creative Suite. I had to learn that new InDesign product to edit my own book because it was so
that's
poorly
a recruiter
done.
mentality. We figure it out. We're resourceful.
DIY.
Right? We're resourceful. We figure it out. So
Yep.
Dandan,
You can pay someone else and it
let's
doesn't
bring
even
it home
work.
here. What? No, you gotta figure this shit out. What
Yep.
is? You have quite the journey, quite the experience. But what is that single greatest piece of advice that you've received that you take action on every single day? What is that mantra? What is that you repeat in your head that gets you going?
I think a big one that sticks with me is like, what got you here won't get you there because your journey is evolving. If you ask me at age 23 this question, it would be a completely different answer because every stage of life, there are different things that work for you in that time. At age 23, I did not have kids.
Exactly.
I did not have, a lot of the obligations that I have now. I did not have aging parents. I had a very different situation than I have today. So what got me here won't get me there. So I have to change. I have to change the way I look at things. I have to change the way I operate. I have to change the way I set goals. I have to not be so hard on myself, because I cannot expect myself to do the same thing I did when I was 23, because now we're adding a lot of extra layers to it. So life is changing, and you got to do the thing appropriate for you at the stage of your life, right? If it's time to grind and you're freaking taking your gas off the pedal and you're off prioritizing partying and going to the fanciest vacations, that is incorrect. You're begging for it. You're begging for financial ruin. You're begging for career ruin. There is a time for grinding 7 days a week. And that's usually between the ages of 20 and about 25. Like, that is where you want to
put in the work.
Put in the work. If you are coasting at age 22 and you're not saving and you're not investing and you're not thinking about the future, you're just like, I'm just going to, by the time you're 30, you will be out of sync.
Be careless. Yeah.
Like, you will not be privileged.
I love it.
Right? Like, I'm privileged now because of the things I did when I was 22. Right? So I think you got to do what's right for you in that situation. Yep.
I love it. So Dandan, last but not least, how do you define success?
I think success is about, again, just that evolution of like being okay with things not being exactly what you expected, right? And again, it's so hard to answer this because my goalposts have changed so much. Like, if you ask me if I was 23, what is success? It is billing what my manager told me I should be billing. It is saving 90% of my income, living with roommates, like literally living in hostels, taking 29-hour trips to go to China because that was the cheapest route. Today, it is not that. Today, it's direct flights. Today, it's, so I think it's about survival. Success today, I think it's about survival. What can you do to best put yourself in a position to survive? Because it's hard. You have to put yourself in a position to survive both currently and then in the next 5 to 10 years of your life. What can you do today to make sure that you are surviving? Ideally thriving, but first level surviving, right? What can you do today to survive? That's success to me. If you did something today that will help you survive, you are going to win. So that applies to someone who's 22. Today, how are you going to survive? Making that extra sales call, talking to that extra candidate, going to that extra meeting. That's going to help you survive. You got to do that. Right? For me, what do I need to do today?
Step of work.
Yeah. Today, what do I need to do?
Effort. Well,
yeah. What do I have to do to survive today? I need to not go to play pickleball today because my joints are hurting. Very different conversation, right? Like, what do I have to do to survive today? I need to stop beating myself up. I need to go and paint my trim. That's what I need to do to survive today, because that's how I'm going to put my living room back together. Totally different set of problems at age 36 than at age 23, right? So you got to do what you got to do to survive.
Yeah.
And I can't blame anybody.
Wait till 45.
Oh my goodness.
Dandan, I want to thank you so much for joining everyone. Exactly. Everyone to check out Dandan's book. You could, and she fell off over there. I want everyone to go to, it's DANZHU. We're going to link it up in the comments there. Please connect with her on LinkedIn. You could find out more. Dandan, I want to thank you so much for joining me. Everyone check out her book. You know where to find out more at thepodcast.com. Follow us on the social media channels at NHP Talent on Insta. Remember, look out for yourself. Be good to yourself. Be better to others. And catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search The Podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.